Hello, everyone. The workshop or the webinar will start shortly. Hi, Jamila. For those of you just joining, we will start the webinar shortly around 12:03. Okay, let's start. Hello, everyone, and welcome. WorkWell NYC is very excited to have you here today with us as we celebrate National Heart Health Month. Today's webinar, Matters of the Heart, will focus on everything to do with heart health. And if anybody's taken any workshop with me, I like the workshops to be interactive. So I'm going to say, please share in the chat, maybe respond in the chat. And regarding questions, if you have any specific questions, put it in the Q&A. And at the end of the presentation, we hope there's enough time where we'll be able to sit down. And I won't say do an Q&A session, but more so a discussion session. So depending on how the time goes. So my name is Brenda Dash, and I'm the Senior Wellness for WorkWell NYC. I'm also a registered dietitian and a certified diabetes educator by trade. So I've been working with many populations dealing with chronic conditions as well as heart issues. So this topic is very passionate for me. Hopefully everyone here is familiar with WorkWell NYC, but if you're not, I'm going to share a little bit about us. WorkWell NYC is the city's worksite wellness program, and we're here to help you live well and work well. Our goal is to create work sites that make it easier for our employees to live healthy, active lifestyles. Health is not just the absence of disease. Health is physical, mental, financial, emotional, and we know that health exists on the spectrum. We are here for you with health and well-being resources and programs to help you move more, eat well, be well, and take action to prevent disease no matter where you are along your health journey. We are committed to addressing matters of inequity and providing platforms to educate and develop structural solutions to health and wellness, both in and out of work. So today we're going to discuss many things. So the agenda, we're going to talk about what is heart disease, what are the symptoms, if there are symptoms, what are the major complications, are there risks, and if so, what are the risk factors, how to eat for a healthy heart, and other important factors needed when we talk about heart health. So if we talk about the heart, to me, we might as well talk about the heart muscle itself. Let's start there, right? And let's talk about the role of the heart in terms of what it does for our body. Well, the main job of the heart is to pump through a network of arteries, veins, and capillaries, this rich flow of oxygenated, nutrient-rich blood to every tissue and organ in the body, including the heart muscle itself, which is definitely an organ. When I think of this system, this circulatory system, being a New Yorker or somebody living in New York, it actually reminds me of the subway system. And let's think about it. If we look at the first terminal as being the heart, and the subway trains as being the blood, and each of the stops along the tracks as being different organs and tissues, that's in some ways like the circulatory system. And when the train systems are working well, typically we arrive from the beginning destination to our final destination in a beautiful time or based on the schedule. But if there's a problem on the tracks, and it may not necessarily be on the 2 track, if I'm on the 2 train, it may be on the 7 track, or it may be on the D track, it may affect my train. And it's the same similar concept when we think about the circulatory system. No matter where there's an issue within the body, it potentially can present itself. So we're going to talk about some of those potential issues that we see. So when we talk about the term, or when we say heart disease, we're referring to several types of conditions that may affect the heart, such as coronary artery disease, which is CAD, irregular heartbeats, disease of the heart muscle, congenital heart defects, as well as heart valve disease. Heart disease is the leading cause of death among adults in the United States. Approximately 655,000 Americans die from heart disease each year. And when we look at it statistically, that's 1 in 4 deaths in the US are a result of heart disease, which is huge. So let's talk a little bit about coronary heart disease. This is what we're going to be focusing on today. So coronary heart disease, or CAD, is one of the most common forms of heart disease, and it affects the major blood vessels that supply the heart muscle. Remember, we talked about the heart needing a constant supply of blood itself. So it affects the major blood vessels that supply the heart muscle with blood. And what we find with CAD is that there's a slow buildup of cholesterols, what we also refer to as plaques, within the inner walls of blood vessels. And I have this model to show you what I'm saying exactly. So this is a healthy blood vessel. And as you can see, the passageway is open. And if you were to look at the inner walls, they're smooth, which allows for a nice, easy flow of blood. But slowly, there can be what we call a buildup of these plaques. And if you see through the model, what do you see as the plaques begin to increase in size? The passageway becomes slowly but surely obstructed to the point where it may be blocked altogether. When there is an increase in the inner lining, or the increase of plaques within the inner walls of blood vessels, what it slowly does, it decreases the blood flow to the heart muscle, which eventually can cause issues. So this buildup of plaque is called atherosclerosis. And as I just shared, atherosclerosis reduces the blood flow to the heart and which I didn't indicate, other parts of the bodies. So CAD, we're talking about the arteries or the blood vessels leading to the heart, but this response or this reaction can happen anywhere in the body. So if it's to occur in the brain, it's when somebody's at risk for a stroke. But if it recurs at other parts of the body, then it can cause tissue damage, because if my lower extremities are not receiving a constant supply of blood, it means that they're not getting the fuel, they're not getting the nutrients that they need. And slowly but surely, it can lead to tissue death. And there is a condition, which is peripheral artery disease, where there's a blockage somewhere in the lower extremities. And what ends up happening is that people start to receive or do not receive enough blood flow to feed the tissues of their lower legs. And I just want to show, I'm a lady of many models, but I have another model which can show you exactly how the blood is affected. So this is a healthy artery, smooth, non-obstructed with cholesterol, while this artery here, as you can see, it has a buildup of cholesterol. And when we look at the blood flow, we find that when it's obstructed, there's a nice, easy flow of blood. But when it is obstructed, it takes a longer period of time in order for the blood to reach that specific tissue. So what are the symptoms? Symptoms of coronary heart disease can include chest pain, chest pressure, discomfort, which is angina. For some people, they may present with shortness of breath. Other people, and why they may not associate it with CAD, is that there may be a pain in the jaw, or they have a pain in the upper belly areas. For people who may have blockage in the lower extremities, they may find that all of a sudden their feet are cold, or there's numbness. They're not really getting a good sensation to their bottom of their feet or to their lower extremities. So there's various symptoms in which people may present when we have CAD. Coronary artery disease often develops over decades, meaning it's not a fast process. This process occurs over years and years. And as a result, sometimes the symptoms may go undiagnosed. For many people, diagnosis only occurs following a heart attack or stroke, after experiencing this pain in the chest, angina, and shockingly, for some, after the diagnosis of heart failure. And I just want to bring a little bit of focus about why heart failure. If my heart is pumping blood for an open vessel, it means that my heart doesn't really have to do much work. The vessel is open, and as a result, the flow of blood travels freely. But as the blood vessel becomes obstructed, do you think it's more work for the heart? It definitely is. It means that the heart has to work a lot harder in order for it to do its job, because at the end of the day, the heart definitely wants to pump that blood through. So if it has a smaller opening to do so, it means that you're putting all this extra pressure on the heart. And what it can end up doing is it can lead the heart to be overworked. And as a result, sometimes it gets enlarged, and sometimes the muscle becomes damaged. And as a result, it means that the heart is ultimately unable to pump enough blood in order to supply the body with its needs. So how do we detect? How can we look or see if we're at risk? There are labs tests and blood tests that are used to help your primary care, your PCP, determine if you're at risk for CAD. And they include both the lipid profile as well as echocardiograms, which are EKG. So I just want to speak a little bit about those two tests so we can have a better understanding. But before we talk about lipid profile, which we're going to talk about, I just want to share some information about cholesterol, because that's what we focus on when we look at the lipid profile. It gives us details on the cholesterol amounts in our bodies. So cholesterol is a waxy fat-like substance that's made in your liver. Your body does need it, and it needs it for cell functions. In order for cells to function properly, we need cholesterol. And cholesterol is also needed to make hormones, vitamins, specifically vitamin D, and it also helps with digestion. Cholesterol is also found in animal sources. So we can consume cholesterol through animal sources, red meat, chicken, eggs. So that's called dietary cholesterol. If you have too much cholesterol in your blood, it can combine with other substances in the blood to form those plaques within the inner walls of your arteries. So let's take a little deep dive and discuss what the different cholesterols are. So when you go to your doctors, sometimes they would say to you, I need to do blood work. And prior to coming in, I want you to possibly fast for a certain amount of time. And when you come in, you take your blood and they send it off to the labs and you get a printout of your blood work. Lipid profile is typically one of those tests that we often see. And I just want to go over what the various components of the lipid profile are. So you have your total cholesterol. And your total cholesterol is the combined amount of both bad as well as good cholesterol in your body. So it doesn't give you much information. It's just telling you about the totality. Your LDL cholesterol is often referred to as your bad cholesterol. And the reason being is it's a major risk for heart disease and stroke. And the reason being, it's the cholesterol that promotes the buildup within the arteries of our body. Now, we refer to it as LDL cholesterol or bad cholesterol, but the true name is low density lipoprotein. And again, it's the bad protein that travels through the body and it tends to stick to the lining of the blood vessels, which ultimately can promote the development of atherosclerosis. There's also a cholesterol called HDL or high lipoprotein cholesterol. And this is referred to as our good cholesterol. And the reason being, your HDL cholesterol transports cholesterol to the liver. So it takes the cholesterol in your body and it takes it to the liver where the liver can break it down and dispose of it. So it's actually a good thing. And we want this number to be a bit high. So when your doctors look at your lipid profile, the higher the blood levels of your HDL cholesterol, it's associated with a lower risk of heart disease. While if this number is low, it's actually associated with a higher risk. And an easy way for you to remember that is the LDL cholesterol, which is your bad cholesterol, you want it to be low, which is L, while your HDL, which is your good cholesterol, you want that number to be high. There's another thing that they look at when they look at the lipid profile, and that's our triglycerides. Triglycerides are the most common form of fat in the body. When we eat food, your body converts calories it doesn't need, so those additional calories, it's changed into TGs, which are then stored in your fat cells. And likewise, when your body needs energy, there's hormones that break down those triglycerides so it can go into the body so we can use it. If you eat too many calories, then you burn, which many of us do, especially calories that are high in simple carbohydrates, such as your sugary drinks and beverages, cakes and cookies, and it means that it increases your triglyceride levels in your blood. Triglycerides, which people may be shocked with, are also associated with alcohol. Alcohol is high in calories and sugar, and as a result, it has a potent effect on your triglycerides. And like with the other fats, cholesterol. So high triglycerides there's still a little bit of evidence, as to what their role is, but it may contribute to the hardening of the arteries or the thickening of the artery walls, which increases their risk for CAD. So I wanted to show just a general guideline, and the American College of Cardiology, as well as the American Heart Association, generally has guidelines that they want people to meet. One thing about recommendations or guidelines, and it's an emphasis that I always share with people, you have to remember that they are general and that we as individuals, we always present as an individual, meaning we have our own family history, we have our own past medical conditions, we have our own current medical conditions. So it's always important to speak with your providers and ask, what are your individual recommendations? So for here, total cholesterol, it is ideal for it to be less than 200. LDL, which is your bad cholesterol, the recommendation on average is for less than 100. But for people living with conditions such as diabetes, it may be restricted to maybe 70. HDL cholesterol, remember, that's the cholesterol that we want to be a bit high. So the goal really, and for women, it's 50 milligrams per deciliter or higher, and for men, 40. And with triglycerides, the recommendation is less than 150. I always say that I like my webinars to be interactive. So I have a question for you, and it's going to come in a poll. So this is going to be the poll question. At what age is it recommended that people start to get their cholesterol tested? And let me see if I can launch that poll for you. At what age is it recommended that people start to get their cholesterol tested? Is it 40 years and older? Starting at 35? Between 9 and 11? Or starting at 30? What's your thoughts? All right, we're getting a lot of responses, so I'm going to wait a few minutes. And thank you all for responding. This is great. And I know some people may be on a telephone or they may be on a device where they don't have access to the poll, so I understand that. And if you want to put your response in the chat, that's fine as well. All right, so I think I'm going to end the poll in a few. I don't want to leave anybody out, so I'm going to do my 5-second countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so let's see what's the poll and let's see the results. So a majority of people said starting at 30 years, so 40%. Second was between 9 and 11. Then it went to 35 and then it went to 40. So thank you for that. The answer, so let me stop that. The answer is between 9 and 11, which is shocking, right? All right, so let's see. Who says it should be between 9 and 11? According to the National Heart and Lung and Blood Institute, a person's first cholesterol screening should occur between the ages of 9 and 11, and then approximately 5 years thereafter. They also recommend that cholesterol screening should occur 1 to 2 years for men ages 45 to 65, women ages 55 to 65. And for people over 65, they should receive annual tests. My response to this, or what I'm going to share now, is how many, and it's not necessarily for you to respond in the chat, but how many of you are aware of when you last had your lipid profile tested, and was it in these general recommendations that I'm sharing now? And if not, I'm going to wear my educator hat here now. I would say to you, feel empowered to reach out to your provider to ask when it was done. Because one thing I always believe is that we have to be active in our healthcare, meaning I don't expect us to go onto Google and diagnose ourselves with conditions. But if we've been told, or if we know what a recommendation is, to be a part of your healthcare team is to ask questions. It's to go to your provider and says, I don't recall when my last lipid profile was. Am I due? Am I up to date? And if you have those numbers in front of you, is to then ask the question, well, what do these numbers mean? Because a lot of times we have a beautiful printout. Sometimes we're even told that the numbers are fine, but we truly don't know what those numbers mean and what does fine mean. It's always important for you to know what your numbers are, because over time it allows you to follow those numbers. Am I trending upwards? If I started good 5 years ago, is my number slowly but surely going into an area where it's not necessarily healthy? So I really push for everybody to be proactive in their healthcare, in their wellness, and be a part of your healthcare team. Ask questions, follow up, and you're going to find that your doctor's office is going to be really responsive to you when you come with questions or when you say, can you explain? So in addition to your lipid profile, we also have your EKG, which is your electrocardiogram, which is a non-invasive electrical test that can look for evidence of heart muscle weakness and heart rhythm irregularities. Damage to the heart due to CAD can be one of the causes that an EKG may be abnormal. May not be everything, but it may show evidence. So what are the risk factors when we talk about CAD or heart disease? Like with many chronic conditions, or like with some of the chronic conditions that we see out there, there's typically risk factors that we don't have influence over, as well as risk factors that we can influence. So some of the risk factors that we don't have influence over include genetics. Having a family history of heart disease, especially if the family member developed it at an early age, puts us at risk. Doesn't mean we are definitely going to have it, but it means that we're at higher risk. And due to that higher risk status, your doctor may recommend lipid profile testing more frequent than the general recommendations. Gender. Men are generally at higher or greater risk for heart disease. However, women's risk increases after menopause. And one of the reasons is they believe is because of estrogen. Estrogen may have a protective factor, but post-menopause, when estrogen levels decreases, that protection declines. And also age. Aging increases your risk for damaged arteries. As we get older, your arteries, instead of being flexible, they can become a little bit more rigid. They become more stiff. And if you recall, I had indicated that cholesterol, it takes decades for this buildup to occur. So as we age, there's a natural formation of cholesterol plaques that can put us at risk. So some of the risk factors we can influence, ironically, are the risk factors that I see across all the chronic conditions: high blood pressure, diabetes, and they include weight. Having overweight or having obesity increases our risk. Lifestyle practices, what we eat, how much participation in physical activity are we currently doing? Alcohol intake, if we smoke versus don't smoke, as well as the management of chronic diseases, and specifically diabetes, high cholesterol, and high blood pressure. So today we're going to spend a little bit of time focusing on the nutrition aspect. Let thy food be thy medicine, and thy medicine be thy food. Hippocrates, a Greek physician from the classical period, is one who is often referred to as the father of modern medicine. I actually looked this up yesterday, so I'm going to be honest with you. But I was so impressed with the thought process of this person many years ago, because in reality it's where we are now. And reason being, he said, Hippocrates placed great emphasis on strengthening and building the body's inherent resistance to disease, and he did this by a prescribed diet, as well as the prescription of gymnastics, exercise, massage, hydrotherapy, I'm not too sure what that is, and sea bathing. So in other words, what we recommend when we talk about a self-practice care or a healthy diet is what he thought about many years ago. So we're catching up to him now, but that's okay. It's never too late, right? So I'm going to share a little bit of Nutrition 101. And this is the first class I ever did when I started school for nutrition. And when they talked about a healthy diet, they never said it had to be a certain diet. They said healthy eating meant that you ate a balanced diet, a diet that was varied in food choices and balanced between the different food groups. And the reason being, each type of food group is going to offer you different vitamins and minerals. And if you just focus on one, it means that you're not going to get the vitamins and minerals that the other foods offer. So even if I were to eat a superfood like beets, and I were to eat beets and only beets for 4 months, I'm going to become deficient in all those other vitamins and minerals that beets don't offer. So it's important to eat a variety of foods every day and to not necessarily overconsume or underconsume, because if you eat too little or too much of any one nutrient, it can put you at health risk. So today we're going to talk about some of the nutrients that we identify with heart health. One is fiber. Fiber is a carbohydrate that includes the parts of plants your body can fully or can't fully digest. Instead of being broken down, it passes through relatively intact through your digestive tracts. Foods high in fiber have been shown to lower your cholesterol and offer other health benefits, such as when you eat foods that are high in fiber, it helps normalize your passing of your stools, right? So if you're constipated, we know that you want to have a diet that's high in fiber. If I have high blood sugars, fiber can help control my blood sugars, my post-meal blood sugars. It aids in my weight, and the reason being, when you eat foods that are high in fiber, it takes a long time for your body to digest them, so it keeps you full for a longer period of time. And we know that diets high in fiber can reduce our risk for some of the digestive cancers. You may have heard of soluble versus insoluble, right? Or insoluble. So there are two types of fibers, but typically fruits and vegetables will contain them both. And foods that are high in fiber include your oats, your oat bran, carrots, peas, lentils, citrus, blueberries. The list goes on. Let me ask a question. Does anybody know what the guidelines for Americans, the recommendation for fiber is? Maybe not. It's 28 grams per day. The recommendation is 28 grams per day. And sadly, approximately 16% of adults living in the US are currently getting that recommendation. And I just want to share that it's not too hard. And I'm going to give an example. So how can I get my fiber? What can I do? So for example, if I were to eat half a cup of lentils, I would get maybe 7.8 grams out of that 28. If I were to eat split peas cooked half a cup, 8.2 grams out of that 28. Beets, maybe 2.8. If I were to have fruit, guava, it gives me around 9 grams per cup. So there are ways that we can get to that 28, but it does mean that we would have to consume those foods that are high in fiber, which includes your vegetables, your fruits, your lentils, your beans, and your whole grains. So keep that in mind, because we're going to talk more about that later. In addition to fiber, when we talk about heart health, you want to talk about the oils that you're consuming. And yes, there are actually oils that are good for our heart. Oils that contain monounsaturated fats, such as your olive oil, avocado, and canola oils, as well as peanut oils, and peanuts or nuts, such as your almonds and your pecans. Polyunsaturated fats, such as sunflower, soybean, and safflower, and walnuts and seeds are high in polyunsaturated, which are also good for your heart. Omega-3 fatty acids, which you find in a lot of your fatty fish, your salmon, your sardines, your tuna. Again, they all contain healthy fats that are good for your heart. One thing I always like to emphasize, even though they're good for your heart, a high consumption or too much can promote weight gain. So you always want to monitor how much fats that you're consuming. Now, I wanted to start off on the good note, because normally when you go to a nutritionist, they tell you, you can't eat this, you should avoid this, maybe not have that. But I didn't want to go there. So we started on the foods that you want to focus on. Now I want to talk about the foods that you want to be mindful of. And when I say mindful versus you can't have, because I understand that as an individual, there's many reasons as to why we consume foods. It has to be based on what we like, our culture, our dislikes, our religion, our community, our accessibility. So there's many reasons as to why we consume foods. So I don't want to ever say that this is what you cannot have. But at least if I share with you the reasons why you want to monitor or limit, it may resonate in a different way. So these are some of the unhealthy fats that can increase your risk for heart disease. And they include your saturated fats, such as red meats, full-fat dairy products, fried foods, lard. And this one, which again is somewhat controversial, your tropical oils. And your tropical oils include palm oil, palm kernel oil, and coconut oil. And even though these are not animal or from animal products, they do contain a high amount of saturated fats. And that's why research or the experts say you want to monitor how much you're consuming. Trans fats, which you find in margarine, shortenings, and cookies, is also something that you want to be mindful of, as well as cholesterol, dietary cholesterol, which is found in egg yolks, organ meats, poultry with the skin specifically, and shellfish. I do want to emphasize that when we talk about saturated fats have a bigger impact on your blood cholesterol than do foods high in cholesterol. I just want to emphasize that because a lot of people don't know. Also, we want to monitor our intake of sodium when we talk about heart health. A diet high in sodium can raise blood pressure, and high blood pressure is one of the major risks for heart disease and stroke. Approximately 70% of the sodium in the American diet comes from processed foods such as deli meats, cheese, canned products, baked goods. Prepackaged foods, including some of those ready-to-eat cereals, can be high in sodium, frozen dinners, TV dinners, and restaurant foods. Anytime we go to a restaurant, that food tastes so good, tastes so nice. And the reason being is that they want to make it as tasty as possible so we can go back. And we have to remember, they also don't want to spend a lot of money when they make a lot food taste good. So the easiest and cheapest ingredients are fat, sugar, and salt. So you always want to be mindful when you're eating out of how much of those types of foods you're consuming. Lastly, and a lot of people didn't realize, sugar. A diet high in added sugar has been linked to increased risk for CVD, coronary vascular disease, type 2 diabetes, as well as weight gain. The leading causes of sugar in the American diet actually come from sweetened drinks, such as your sodas, your sport drink, your energy drinks, desserts, sweet snacks, and places where you don't think it exists, such as some of those yogurts. I want to give you a recommendation, or the dietary guidelines for Americans say that we should be consuming around maybe 50 grams of added sugar per day. And I'm going to show you in a minute where we are in terms of what kinds of sugar amounts we find in some of our popular foods and drinks. So this is the food label. And why I thought this was important, because I just gave you a slew of information. I said, I want you to be mindful of saturated fats. I want you to limit trans fats, monitor how much cholesterol. But a lot of people may say, well, Brenda, how would I know that? How am I going to be able to monitor that? So I want to give you a takeaway message that at least you can apply. So this is a food label, and I'm going to feel special because I'm going to use a red dot. All right, and the food label tells you about the nutritional content of a food item. So all this information is relevant to the content or the nutritional content of the food. And as you can see, this information here is for one serving and one serving only. So even though the package contains 4 servings, all this information from the calories to the fat grams to the cholesterol is pertinent to only one of those 4 servings. You're always going to see calories at the top. And after calories, it's going to give you your fat profile, your total fat, your saturated fats, your trans and cholesterols. It then gives me sodium, gives me information about carbohydrates. Look at this, added sugars and protein. So I don't expect you to remember the recommendations because I think it's a lot. So for example, when we talk about salt, the recommendation is 2,300 milligrams for people living with for the average population, excuse me, and even I'm getting confused now. So for anybody, all of us, generally, it's 2,300, which is about 1 teaspoon. If you have high blood pressure, the recommendation is a bit lower. It says 1,500 milligrams. Too much information, but an easy way for you to do it. You see this column in blue? It's what we call the percent daily value. Every nutrient has a daily value, meaning a recommendation. It may mean for you to meet it. It may mean for you to be below it. So for example, sodium, we want to be below 2,300. The sugar, 50 grams, we want to be below 50 grams of added sugar. The saturated fats, it's 20 grams per day if I'm following a 2,000 calorie diet. We want to be below those 20 grams. So this here, which is your percent daily value, it allows you to know how much of that recommendation you're receiving within each of these servings. Hopefully that makes sense. So the percent daily value on the nutrition facts label show you how much of that nutrient is in one serving of food based on the 2,000 calorie diet. So if I were to look in this food, we see that saturated fat is 23%, total fat is 12, cholesterol is 12, which may not mean anything to you at the moment, but now it is. Your goal, when you're looking at this percent daily value, you want to look for items, or the goal is to have the items that we know can affect our heart to be as close to 5% as possible. That would equal low. And as we get closer to 20% or higher, that is considered high. So for example, this 4.5 grams may not appear high because it says 4.5 grams, but if I go to the percent daily value and I see 23%, I know that this particular item is therefore high in saturated fats, and I know saturated fats can cause or increase my risk of cholesterol development or plaque development in my arteries, yeah? Likewise, I shared earlier that sodium is a risk factor. This item contains 850 milligrams of sodium. When I go to the percent daily value, it's 37%. So is that a high or is that a low? I'm not seeing that chat, but I'm hoping you're thinking it's high. So it's high. So I have my second, let me close my laser point for a second. Let me go to my trivia number 2. If you were to look at this food item, would you say that this food item is not, that's the key, is not high in saturated fats, cholesterol, and added sugar, total fat and sodium, or protein? And let me go to my poll and let me hit launch. Ooh, why am I not? I need to close that. Excuse me 1 second. So I'm going to launch the poll. Sorry about that. If you were to look at, all right. You're moving. All right, I'm going to give it a few more. I see everybody's moving towards. So again, thank you very much for participating. This is great to see. So, and again, the answer is this food item is not high in. All right, I'm going to give it maybe, I still see people moving, so I want to give people a chance because people may be analyzing the label, which is what I want people to do. All right, so I think we're good. I can stop the poll. All right, so let's see. Ooh, can I stop the poll? All right, so I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results. So a majority, 78% of you said it was not high in cholesterol and added sugar. And then across the other numbers, we saw a few people said saturated fats, a few people said fat and sodium, and a couple also said protein. So I'm going to stop the sharing. I'm going to bring this down. So let's see what the answer is. It was actually, or I looked at it, and it would be fat, cholesterol and sugar. And the reason being, if I look at this and I see cholesterol, it says 0, and the percent daily value is also 0. And if we go to the added sugar, it's less than 1%. But again, when I look at the percent daily value, it's less than the 5, right? Saturated fat, look at this number. This is 40%. And for it to be considered low, we want it to be close to 5% as possible. So that definitely is high. Likewise, when we look at the total fat, it's not 20, but it's close to at 18. And what else? The sodium, again, it's not 20, but at 16%, to me, I still think it's pretty high. Protein, on the other hand, is 19%. So we know protein is high. So my question to you, is this an item? Well, actually, before I go there, let me give my next poll. And then I'm going to ask the question I was going to ask you. I have a follow-up poll. If you were to guess what food item this label is for, what would you think? Ground lean beef, ground turkey, plant-based meat substitute, or ground beef. So the difference between A and D is that A is lean beef and D is generally beef. Let me get my poll. And I need to go back, and then I need to launch number 3. All right, I'm getting... I'm getting a little tie. I'm loving this. This was a tough one. All right, so I'm going to stop it. I know some people are still answering, but I'm going to, because I know we're running out of time and I do not want to get the chance to not get to finish. So I'm going to end the poll. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to end and I'm going to share the results. So we had somewhat of a tie. So ground beef was the highest, followed by plant-based meat substitute, which 31%. Then we had ground turkey, and the last one was ground lean beef. All right, so let's see. What was the answer? It was actually the plant-based meat substitute. And for those of you who said that, if you want to ask, put in the chat, why did you say that? And I'm going to give some people a hint. I want you to think back when we were talking about cholesterol. Remember I said, where do we get cholesterol? Dietary cholesterol comes from, I said, animal sources. And these, the ground beef, turkey, and the ground lean beef, the ground turkey and the ground beef, are all from animal sources, while the plant-based was the only one which is a non-animal source. And hence, that's the reason why you didn't find the sodium, not the sodium, the cholesterol, excuse me. So that's the reason it was cholesterol-free, because it was a plant-based, a label from a plant-based meat substitute. So the question I was going to ask you, and I want you to think about it, if you were to consume, or if you were living with CAD or high cholesterol or high blood pressure, is this an item that you potentially would eat on a regular, that's a key word, regular basis? And there's no right or wrong. I would just like to know your thought process, and I will share mine. Okay, so no, high sodium, no, not every day. We have to balance. I would not eat on a regular basis. Okay, okay, sometimes. All right, perfect. And a lot of you answered you answered the question in your responses. You said not on a regular basis. And some people said, well, no, they wouldn't. And the reason I wouldn't, because I'll be mindful of the sodium. So when we look at the sodium is high at 16%, yes. And also the saturated fat. Now this saturated fat was not from an animal source, it was actually from the coconut oil. So again, there are some people who believe that if saturated fat comes from a non-animal source, it will not have the same effect on our blood vessels. I would always say, just be mindful of how much you're consuming. I said regular because one thing I always like to emphasize, our diet can't be based on one food item. Our diet can't be based on one meal or even one day. When we talk about food, it's important to look at your totality. What are you consuming on a regular basis, and what foods are the go-to foods that you normally go to? And as long as you look at that, there wouldn't be such a thing as a cheat day or a bad day, because overall, you're making sure you're focusing on those foods that we know are healthy. All right, so I did want to show another item. And the reason I wanted to show this is that I had a class and one of the participants shared this with me a day or so after, when she learned how to read food labels. And if you saw this label, and hopefully everybody can see it like a flashing light, why do you think this individual sent me this particular food label? What jumps out at you? And let me go into the, I'm seeing chats. High sugar, yes. Geez, yes. 100%. 100%. It's the sugar content. The sugar content at 130% of that recommended daily value of less than 50. And I'm going to give you a secret. And normally I have people see me at least 4 visits before I give them this secret, but I'm going to share it with you today. A nice way for you to determine how many teaspoons, because one thing about labels, what I find very difficult, is that we don't speak in grams. I don't say, Mary, how many grams of sugar did you have today? But I may ask you, well, how many teaspoons of sugar do you put in your tea or coffee, right? So one of the reasons why sometimes we find labels so difficult to follow is that the information is above our heads when we see milligrams and grams. So one way to convert the sugar or added sugar into a tangible source, meaning something that you can identify, is when you see the grams of sugar, you divide that by 4. So that's 68 grams divided by 4 tells me that this drink, this liquid, had 17 teaspoons of sugar, which now we all can be like, wow, because 17 for all of us means a lot because we all understand what a teaspoon is. So I just wanted to add that in. So tips for nourishing a healthy heart. Number 1, we want to put focus on whole grain products, your brown rice, your bulgur, your whole wheat, your pasta, your quinoa, fruits and vegetables, preferably frozen or fresh. You can consume fruits in a cup, but you want it to be maybe the natural juice versus the syrup, yeah? Fish and skinless poultry, because a majority of the cholesterol and the saturated fat is in that skin. Fat-free or low-fat skim dairy products. After the age of 2, the recommendation is for all of us after the age of 2, to be on low-fat dairy products. The reason why people consume dairy is typically because they want the calcium, they want the protein. But there's no difference in calcium and protein between the low-fat products and the whole milk. And nowadays, we have so many dairy alternatives, such as almond milk, you have soy milk. So there's variations that we can go to if you want to also not consume animal products. Nuts, seeds, and legumes, very high in fiber, high in protein. Oils, we want to focus on your mono and your polyunsaturated fats. And also food preparation. A lot of times people eat healthy foods such as vegetables, but if it's fried, and specifically what is it fried in, it may make it less healthy. So focus on baking, grilling, steaming, or air frying. And on the reverse, some of the things that we want to eat less of, your refined grains. And some people may not know why do we say, well, if you can, focus on whole grains. Refined grains have the germ and the bran removed. The grains are finer in texture and have a longer food storage life. But during the processing of removing that bran and that germ, a lot of times you are removing the fiber and sometimes other nutrients. So that's why we do recommend focusing on whole grain. We want to limit our intake of processed foods that are high in sodium, red meats, whole fat dairy products, foods that are deep fried or pan fried, baked goods, because a lot of our baked goods are high in trans fats. Again, we want to try and limit our intake of trans fats as well as saturated fats because they have the biggest impact on our cholesterol, and beverages and foods that are high in added sugar. When we talk about heart health, it's not just about what we're eating, though. Other factors that we want to monitor for heart health: blood pressure. You want to be able to manage and control blood pressure. You want to participate in physical activity. Does anybody know what the recommendation is? Put it in the chat. What's a recommendation of physical activity for the week? What is the recommendation? 30 minutes, 180. Okay. All right. So it's actually 150, about 30 minutes per day. Yes, per day. You don't want to be there on a Sunday dancing around and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you're relaxing back to the following Sunday. You want to spread your physical activity out. So you do maybe 30 minutes per day. And even those 30 minutes doesn't have to be in one lump sum. It can be broken down into 20 or 10-minute intervals throughout the day. If we are living with overweight or we're living with obesity, we can look to try and lose as little as maybe 5 to 10% of our current weight. It doesn't have to be a huge amount, but we know that even with a little bit of weight loss, it can promote better management of chronic conditions. We want to focus on sleeping soundly. Yes, sleep has a huge impact on our overall health and wellness. If we smoke, and I know it's easier said than done, but we want to be able to work to try and stop smoking. Limit alcohol use. Recommendation for women, 1 or less per day, men 2 or less per day. So we want to try and stick to those recommendations. And that's obviously if we drink. Manage stress. Stress is a part of everyone's life, but how we manage it is completely unique to each and every one of us. So we want to be able to focus on managing stress in a healthy way. We want to focus on managing chronic conditions because we know that they're so interrelated. Your diabetes, your high blood pressure, your high cholesterol. So we want to be able to work on managing all three. Take medications as prescribed. And I just want to stop here for 1 minute. And I'm stopping because one thing I really want to emphasize, sometimes you may be doing everything correct, meaning you're eating all the foods that your doctor or your nutritionist advised you to eat. You're exercising as your doctor asks you to do, but for some reason, your blood cholesterol is still high. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It means that, you know what, maybe I just need that extra additional support, and that support may be through medication. So if you are prescribed a medication, it's important to take the medication as prescribed because that's how they work. It has to be taken as prescribed. But what's equally as important, if you're not taking it as prescribed, you need to share with your provider how you are taking it, because that's the only way they're going to know how to work with you. So it's important to have, again, that conversation with your provider to be a part of your healthcare team, because when we look at a lot of these chronic conditions, 90% of it is what we're doing at home. So the only how your provider is going to know what you're doing at home is to bring that information to them. And lastly is to see your primary care provider, your PCP. If you haven't seen a PCP within a long period of time or short period of time, then it's important to reach out to schedule that appointment. Having your annual visits or your annual comprehensive exams are important, number one for screening, but also for your overall wellness. Is there any questions? And I know the questions, I know I didn't give you much time for questions, so I want to say sorry about that. Let me see, I'm going through. I do raising good. What does caffeine and dairy do to the heart? Thank you. Well, in reference to the heart, in terms of, we know, well, I shared that dairy, full fat dairy, is going to increase your cholesterol. So you want to be mindful with how much full fats you're going to have. In terms of the caffeine, can't say in reference to increasing cholesterol levels, but we do know that if we're living with high blood pressure, you want to monitor how much caffeine, or when you're having caffeine. If you're having difficulty sleeping, it may affect with your sleep patterns. Can a person have heart disease for many years and not know it? They can, at least the slow growth of, if I had shared earlier that for the plaque buildup, it can take years for the plaque to generally build up in your arteries. So early stage heart disease, potentially, I'm sure, can. If your arteries become clogged, is there any way to reverse it? I don't know at what level, and I'm going to say this, it would take an invasive procedure to unclog, because we know that sometimes they have to put balloons in to unclog. But typically, if you're on early stage plaque buildup, when you're eating a high fiber diet, or you're consuming foods that contain the good fats, it potentially can do some of the reversing. It can decrease your LDL cholesterol, and it can increase your HDL. So during the early stages, but I don't know at what point diet and all that doesn't work, and it has to be a procedure. Can you talk about the difference? Please repeat. Good cholesterol. All right. And I know I don't have, well, I'm over time, so I don't want to go through all the questions. I see that people are leaving, so I do want to be able to give you just some things that's coming up for Work Well NYC. Number one, when you get the slides, you will get information on healthy eating resources. So if you want to, please visit those sites. I want to share that we have an 8-week Let's Bring the Pressure Down blood pressure management program. The current cycle is actually full, but we will be offering the cohort again later on in the year. So please look out for that for anybody interested in learning more about blood pressure and how to better manage. I spend a lot of time talking about fiber today. So please, please, please join us for March when we do our Fiber Day Your Way, when we talk about how we can consume 5 servings of fruits and vegetables to try and get all the benefits that these foods offer. So please join us for that special event. And stay tuned. We offer an array of programs. Again, we want to work with you, be able to provide programs that you find exciting. So please visit our website, nyc.gov/WorkWellNYC for upcoming events, resources, previous webinars, and more. And for everybody, stay in contact. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It was truly a pleasure doing this webinar today. I see a couple of hands up, so let's see. Ooh. Jamila, I see your hand up.
That was an accident. My apologies.
Okay. Tressie, I see your hand up. All right, so maybe I'm just all right, so let me, as you're going through, let me go continue to read. As everybody's coming off, I can go through some of the questions. Maybe people are still here. Are sugar substitutes okay? In what amounts?
Thank you, Brenda.
You're welcome. Sugar substitutes are considered safe. I really couldn't say in what amount because I don't have the information in front of me. Typically, they would have recommendations. But I can say overall, they are considered safe. I'm going to keep my bias out. So yes, they are considered safe. Tracy said, I thought that canola oil was the same category as palm oil. No, canola oil in moderation is not similar to the tropical oil. So it doesn't contain saturated fats. But people who do believe that canola oil in excess, because it contains omega-6 fatty acids, can potentially have inflammatory effects in the body. So that is the big difference in why people say that olive oil may be a little bit more healthier than canola oil, but not the same as palm oil. If you have high blood pressure, can you have at least a cup of coffee a day? You can. I mean, and again, it depends on how extreme your blood pressure is out of control. One of those things is to have that conversation with your provider. You know, maybe they would recommend decaf versus a regular. I mean, it's hard to say because I'm not working with an individual patient, but sometimes people's blood pressure may be to the extreme where even that 1 cup may not be necessarily recommended. But by and large, 1 cup shouldn't have a huge effect. I was told that it had been removed from the don't eat list for cholesterol. Yes, the recommendation for cholesterol now has changed. Before there was a recommendation of 300 milligrams per day, but now they have removed the cholesterol recommendations because they're wondering exactly how, if cholesterol truly has the same impact as what they thought it did, dietary cholesterol. And for some reason, I'm not too sure, I cannot launch my last poll. All right. I'm going to try it one more time, and I know a majority of people are back. Okay, thank you. You're welcome. Thank you. Oh, you're welcome, Margaret. Thank you ever so much. You're welcome, Yolanda. Thank you. Thank you for coming.